Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia with me, Scott Craig. The head of Russia's Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, called the relationship between the Church and the Russian state a miracle over the past 12 years as he threw his support behind Vladimir Putin's presidential candidacy. Speaking at a gathering of religious leaders, Mr. Putin seemed to gather the support of the country's leading religious organizations. But does this signify a change in the way religious faith and organized religion operate in Russia? And does it raise questions about the role of Russia's Orthodox Church and religion more generally in the 21st century? And is the Church right to become involved in politics, or is it at risk of alienating itself from Russian people? And what is the role of the Church been in Russian society, historically speaking? To discuss this, I'm joined here in London by Dr. Marat Sterin. He's lecturer in sociology of religion at King's College London. Simon Dixon is professor of Russian history at UCL's School of Slavonic and East European Studies. Lesley Chamberlain is a writer who's written 2 books on Russia. And I'm also joined on the line from Moscow by Vakhtang Kipshid, who's a member of the Expert Group for Freedom of Religion and Belief at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Vakhtang, let me come to you first. Is it true to say, or is it fair to say, that the Church really is becoming more involved in daily political life in Russia?
First of all, I'd like to say that after the collapse of the Soviet regime, Church as well as other religious organizations in Russia were granted full scope of religious freedoms, and they found themselves to be quite free to actively participate in social life of our state, as it always used to be before revolution. And Russian Orthodox Church, as well as other traditional religions of Russian Federation, started to be actively involved, as you said, in everyday events, reacting to the political steps which are undertaken by authorities, and also trying to regain the position of social partner of the government in many issues such as social service, patronizing of orphanages, re-establishing of the Chaplains Institute, and providing religiously oriented courses in schools of our country. I wouldn't call it political involvement, because the Russian Orthodox Church and as well as other religious communities in our country have always expressed the view that a religion should be separated from political struggles that we can face, as well as other democratic countries. And of course, beside that, there are very many issues which are of political nature, but have something to do with a religious mind. But the Russian Orthodox Church led other religious communities in their attempt to put pressure on Russian government as well as Russian parliament to put limits for the gambling in big cities. And now we have had a kind of success, because gambling is now very limited in our country, and Russian Orthodox Church, as well as leaders of Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam, could be proud of that, because they contributed to the enactment of these laws. Beside that, Russian Orthodox Church always keep their eye on the legislation on family values. Religious communities, more than any other political and social forces in this country, understand that something should be done in this regard to support families, to put some limitations on abortions, and to provide tax exemptions for families, to support families with many children, and so on.
However, the Church, the Patriarch in particular, seems to have gone beyond that. I mean, he's endorsing a particular presidential candidate. He's endorsing Putin. And doesn't that in some way compromise the independence of the Church?
Well, there are some comments coming from some mass media agencies which trying to somehow present the meeting between Patriarch and some leaders of religious communities and candidate Putin as a sign of this kind of support. But I would describe the situation taking into consideration two factors. First factor is that was not only the Russian Orthodox Church who took part in this meeting. As you know, I would shortly retell you the story, the pretext of this meeting. Presidential candidate Putin came to Patriarch Kirill to congratulate him on the 30th anniversary of his being at the patriarchal throne of the Russian Orthodox Church. That was on the 1st of February. And during these congratulations, they decided to organize a meeting with religious leaders, Russian Orthodox, Muslim leaders, Buddhist, Jewish, Protestant, and Roman Catholic leaders of Russia, together with candidate for presidency, Mr. Putin. And this meeting took place yesterday. During this meeting, all religious leaders had chance to somehow transfer the understanding of the of what they consider to be necessary for the development of Russia for this candidate. What Patriarch said as that Mr. Putin has quite founded chances to be elected, and this is only I would say his proposal. This is not a trace of direct support, but only kind of setting of the facts of this meeting.
Marat Sterin, is it fair to say that the Russian Orthodox Church is becoming more involved in the day-to-day political life of Russia? I mean, this meeting that took place that we've just been discussing, it did seem that the Church came very close to essentially outright endorsing Mr. Putin.
Well, in my view, it definitely is, and I don't think that there is anything wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with the religious organizations and mainstream churches or non-mainstream organizations being involved in politics. Being involved in politics is part of religion everywhere. You know, in the United States, there is a common kind of misrepresentation of what the First Amendment on the separation between church and state means. It means separation between church and state, but not churches or religious organizations from politics. Actually, it implies that religious organizations will be involved in politics. The real problem is how it's done, through what process, whether it's done within a kind of common legal framework, which is equally applied to all religious organizations. So certain institutions, religious organizations have privileges, and so on. That's a real problem. And whether there are some informal sort of, networks and informal interactions which result in certain laws or politics between state structures and leaders of religious organizations. These are the real problems. But he actually endorsed one candidate against the others. He did say that Putin was the likeliest winner. That was almost a foregone conclusion that he will be winner of the election. And coming from an organization with the kind of sort of social weight and political weight that the church has, it can be legitimately construed as an endorsement.
In effect, this compromises the church's independence, that the church can be used as part of a political process.
If I may interrupt, what I just wanted to stress is that we're speaking about this meeting between Patriarch Kirill and Putin. I don't know why, but we don't stress that was not bilateral meeting. That was meeting of patriarch from one side, but he was not the only one from religious leaders who took part in this meeting.
No, it was, as I said in my introduction to this conversation, it was a gathering of religious leaders. However, no doubt that the endorsement of the Orthodox Church means something different than does the endorsement of other religions in Russia.
Yeah, but one of our guests said, that was a kind of sign of privileges that are granted to the Russian Orthodox Church. But I would just want to stress that this meeting was multi-religious, and that was meeting of President candidate Putin with religious leaders, not with the Russian Orthodox Church. It's very important.
I think we're all very clear on that point now. Lesley Chamberlain, if I can come to you. I mean, we were talking about the independence of the Church a moment ago. But, I mean, to take a more historical perspective on this, I mean, how have sympathies with the Church changed over time and perceptions of the independence of the Church changed over time, in your view?
When I spent a year in the Soviet Union in 1978-79, there was a lot of sympathy, certainly on the part of Westerners, for the Russian Church, because it seemed to be a repository of some kind of freedom, some kind of dignity of the individual that was being repressed by the Soviet state. But I think if one looks at the history of the Orthodox Church, I'm not a great expert, but I've looked at it a bit in the 20th century. I think that the period in which the Russian Church was able to express liberal values, and I must say that from all I've heard in this discussion so far, I'm rather horrified to find that I might be alone in my defence of liberal and secular values, which don't exclude the Church, but see it as a kind of dissenting commentator on politics rather than involved on the American or on the Russian model. I mean, for me, as a representative of the liberal Enlightenment, those two countries and the way they're developing, it's thoroughly negative. I feel very, very, very bad about it. And as far as the Russian Church is concerned, I think its most interesting time was between 1905 and 1924, when there was at least an attempt to modernize and to liberalize, and to a thinker like Sergei Bulgakov, who is very important to, I think, the Russian soul. I mean, I'm not sure that the Orthodox Church actually represents the Russian soul, or indeed the Russian individual, as I believe it should. A thinker like Sergei Bulgakov was pushing very hard for reforms in the Church, so that it might actually play a social role and a charitable role in Russian society rather than prop up official politics. And of course that lasted a very, very short time, and in the tragedy of what happened to Patriarch Tikhon from 1922 to 1924, he was pretty much under house arrest, and Lenin, the Bolshevik, the new Soviet regime, imposed a so-called living church, which of course was a dead church, and did away with any spark of independence in the Orthodox Church. So that the developments we've been talking about over the last few days in Russia seem to me to confirm a very negative trend in the Orthodox Church, which we've seen time and again in Russian history.
Just a reminder, you're listening to The Voice of Russia with me, Scott Craig, and today I'm discussing the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in political life with my guests Marat Sterin, Simon Dixon, Lesley Chamberlain and Vakhtang Kipshidze. Simon Dixon, let me come to you. I mean, in terms of also taking a more historical perspective on the Church, of course, we were discussing this before, but the Orthodox Church in Russia has had some unique problems in terms of how do you run a national church in a multinational, multi-ethnic state?
Yes. As an historian, I don't really mind whether things are positive or negative. I'm not trying to attribute value to them. I'm trying to explain how they come about. And I think you're right. It's not a unique Russian problem. It's the problem for any multinational state faced with a variety of religious beliefs. How can it accommodate all of them without offending some of them? And this is a great worry for any multinational state, not only now, but certainly in the past. As the Tsarist Empire expanded out of areas which were Orthodox and Slavic, it encountered all sorts of different multinational, multi-denominational groups of people, and it wasn't really sure how to deal with them. It could either try to administer them all according to the same sort of secular regulations and ignore what they believed, or it could try to make them all a bit more Russian and convert them to Orthodoxy. And on the whole, the Tsarist regime went for the more tolerant option for most of the time, because it was more interested in tax revenue than it was interested in religious belief. The only